let's jump into the questions. Please.
So Umar, thank you very much for the taxi example, the payment in taxi. It's very simple, but it's very impactful and part of our life. So, and I seeing the picture of the check there, and Dubai and UAE being one of the rare countries in the world where the check is still used so much. Can we hear your comments on that part, if you have any insights down the road in a few years?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I did want to touch on the check as well, but I thought in the interest of time, I'll let the panel come up. But I think this is a big problem, right? I mean, if you look at the UK, 10 years ago, checks started to become extinct. And one of the things I had to learn or teach myself was to write a check when I moved here from the UK, because I had actually forgotten how to write the check. And you know, one of the bankers had to correct me that, no sir, you don't sign here, you sign on this part. So it's amazing that you know, checks are still very much part and parcel of the economy here. And I was actually, we did a Fintech Innovation Challenge with the EGM recently, and one of the companies we looked at, they've actually come up with electronic checks to address the problem that checks are such an inherent part of the society that they're saying that, look, let's try to at least just replace the paper check with an electronic check. But the whole concept of check in itself just fascinates me. But again, I think it's only a matter of time as trust in the technology builds and there is enough acceptance, because I think there's also quite an inherent fear in the society. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that unlike other countries in other parts of the world, this is a very multicultural society. So people are coming from developing countries, third world countries, mature markets, each coming with their own view of transactions. And there is no one majority dominant group here, right? It's such a heterogeneous variation in the society that it will take time for everybody to move collectively. But I think unless and until the government takes measures like they've taken in Europe, where, for example, in Netherlands, you cannot do a transaction more than €1,000 in cash. It has to be paid electronically. So I think as the UAE and some of the regional governments move, we will start to see these checks and other paper-based, basically, mechanisms of payment diminish and an upward take on the electronic.
Hi. You talked quite a lot in the presentations, discussions around the transactional perspective of being cashless, even on a personal basis. But from many perspectives, cash is part of the culture. And I'm quite interested in, you've touched on it a little bit just now. See, I was thinking what kind of question I was going to ask here. So I'm going to go to the point. When we look at what happened recently in India with the demonetization, what we saw was not just a corporate change, but obviously a culture change in how cash was used. And that has continued to feed on through, whereby you're seeing the use of, say, for example, QR codes on a stall, you know, in a marketplace, being run by somebody who is maybe in their 70s. You know, there's a massive shift that happened very quickly. I'm not suggesting the UAE or anybody does that, but I mean, I'd just be interested to take people's perspective on, is the cashless society in next generation coming because of a culture change, or is it going to be driven by the central banks?
Who wants to take this one?
Well, I have to thank you for this question, because I think it's what we've been facing in this part of the world for so many years. It's definitely driven by user demand. Central banks, as we've been speaking to central banks for a very long time, and it's a fragmented area here, so every central bank has their own vision and their own way of reading the demand and the user demand in the region. However, the user demand is completely different. And let's run just a quick survey here. Who has children over 3 years of old uses smartphones? 3 years of old. I think we have a few here. And how many of them did ask you to actually buy them some application or services using your credit card, which you don't want to share? Yeah? That's exactly the demand coming. The culture is changing, and central banks has to be aware of this culture change. And here where I have to oppose with my colleague here that cash will never go away. It will go away. The demand is different today. Maybe not our generation, maybe the next generation or the generation afterwards, but it's going obsolete, it's changing. There's a national security matters related to this item, which is definitely a direction by all the authorities as we speak with them. There is a major risk now with cash transactions and non-visibility, which we have to somehow sort out. But how will this change happen? It's, of course, the demand. And I have to give another example, which is related to the financial inclusion, but it's not directly on transactional basis. I went to Cairo about 2 months back for a visit, and I was surprised that in Cairo, the majority are using Uber and Careem. These two items, it's a technology-based application for taxis, which we are all using, but in Cairo or in Egypt in generally, you wouldn't expect this much of exposure for such service. It's a technology that drives your transportation. And with such adaptation to this technology, you can see that the demand is definitely towards technology. The penetration, the high penetration of smartphones gives access to technology. And if you give people authenticated or credible way to manage their financial sources with some kind of incentive or motivation, I think it's much easier for people to just not use cash anymore. So it's definitely culture. Central banks has to think alongside with the fintech players, and here I also have to mention the word, whether is it an international player coming to the market or is it a local player. In my opinion, the international player would have less readiness to adapt to the central bank's requirements. All this services we've seen lately coming to the market, like PayPal, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, all of those are still targeting the bankable audience, which is not the majority. 80% are unbanked. Don't look at UAE only. Beyond UAE, there are countries that are totally dependent on cash, and those are not served yet. You're using Apple Pay, you have to use your credit card. What about those who does not have credit card? Today, what Cash have been doing, for example, and I'm just driving this example because there's no many models like Cashew e-wallets that serves the unbanked. You're turning cash into virtual currency, and then you're using this virtual currency to buy online, and hopefully later on to use it wherever you go, to pay for transportation, contactless transactions, remittance. And that happens, as you just mentioned, Massimo, it happens through now partnership with banks. Banks are using companies, fintech companies, to front face with the users as they understand the demand. They're building the relationship and they're taking a step back. That's happening now in Saudi, for example, with us, in UAE, in other countries as well. So it's the culture, and the central bank is learning through the journey. As you can see today, there are no clear regulations for e-wallet in the region. And that's a very strange thing if you're having a statement that you want a cashless society. If you're not allowing an e-wallet, banks are not interested for lower, let's say, the people who are less paid. Banks are not interested in entertaining those who are less paid. So if you're not providing wallets for people to just start transacting and use these services and transfer their cash into a virtual currency, how do you consider this entire industry to be disrupted and change? If I have answered your question.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 more questions, then a quick summary, and we then almost keep the schedule.
There's just one observation I've got as well on that, is that not many people are aware that in the UAE, the NOL card can actually be used to make payments for other services. So the RTA, which is the Road and Transport Authority here, actually handles significant amounts of money because people top up their NOL cards, and those monies actually, it's a win-win situation for the government, because on the one hand the government pays, on the other hand it takes through the null card. And your null card can then be used to buy goods and services from non-RTA retailers, and that is something the government is working on to actually promote. So they're all working with all the local banks and that is where the social inclusion comes in, because typically speaking, your high income earners will not necessarily be travelling on RTA, metro or buses, but for the blue collar workers, they do all typically have null cards. So in a quite a clever way, they're able to capture that market. So there is some government sponsorship around that concept of bringing in that category of consumer. So and I'm seeing that a lot. We're working on quite a few projects trying to bring that in.
Which is important.
Yeah.
Good comment again, thank you. So there's one, and then there's the last one.
My question is to my colleague KPMG, Mr. Omer. I'd like to know your vision in the future. If we suppose you have a commercial bank adapt a fintech, and from your point of view as an auditor and financial advisor, you go to one of these banks, you need to raise its capital adequacy or ICAP. All this would be, I think, would be as cash, but cashless. When you go to the cash flow, no cash flow. When you go to the cash as an asset in the financial position, there is no cash, physical cash. This is one of the challenge. I try to guess what is the future when you review or audit these financial positions. These your questions. Second point, after you complete this,
So I'm actually not an accountant. I'm on the consulting side. But some of my colleagues and I often have this discussion, and I think so one thing you have to keep in mind is the society evolves and then the regulations follow. All right, so the regulations will always try to play catch up to how the society or the economy follows. It's a bit like some bug is discovered in Apple by some hacker somewhere, and then Apple will scamper to release some fix. Similarly, cryptocurrencies came, and now the regulators are wondering, okay, what do we do with them? So similarly, money laundering, terrorist financing, structured, unstructured financial products, the market evolves, the regulator follows, right? So the same would apply to banks and their capital and their balance sheet and their assets, is that I think as the economy evolves and the whole cash to cashless moves, I think the regulations will move. And in my view, actually, I think we're going to go a bit back in time to the barter trade days where value was traded, not currency, right? And I think the same thing is actually going to start to happen where value of some shape will be captured in some form of an asset, right? Now it could be digital or something, but it's not going to be what we say today as a physical cash. Because actually, if you look at history, cash was supposed to represent an amount of gold held by the central bank, but that doesn't happen anymore, right? That was abolished previously. So I think now cash is just paper representing value, but it's not value itself. So I think, when we have balance sheets and assets and all of those, I think in the future, there will be something to represent value. What that is, I'm not sure. I don't think anybody is. But we know that the way cash today represents value is not going to be the way it is in the future. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you.
And then there's the last question.
I have another point to my friend Suhail. I think when we talk about as a Islamic Sharia in terms of applying the fintech technology, of course, as a commercial bank, of course, we encourage this methodology of adapting a new product. But I think one of the key challenge you have to adapt, you have to convince the regulator and the scholar. Of course, I'm not a scholar, but you have to adapt, encourage the scholar to know is it allowed or not allowed to be adapted. Because in Egypt, when the Azhar say this is prohibited, he talks about bitcoins. But in terms of mobile payment technology, all this would be applied, no problem. Therefore, I'd like to clear this point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And the last question.
Thanks for presentation. My question is that for the cashless system, we have individuals and also companies. Companies always, most of the time, insist in the check payment because of the system of documentation and signatures. Most of the time, it is the financial managers who prepare all the things, and after that, they deliver to the CEO for the signature. Then how could it be possible for the cashless system to deploy in such companies? Because I think, at least in my country, there will be resist for the cashless system in the companies.
Who wants to take?
I think I mentioned the answer for this in one sentence, which is we have to incentivize users all the time. Today, most of those lower paid segment, I would say, they do not see an incentive being or seeing their financial exposed somehow. They would become subject to taxation and other stuff. Now, how do we incentivize this population, which is not minor in so many countries around the world? I think it's the microfinancing that could play a big role in this area. So many of those individuals are lacking support when it comes to financing certain important items they need in their daily life, like, for example, buying a refrigerator or a car. That could be a major investment for them at a certain point of time. If we incentivize those workers, those users, to actually expose their financials, prove that they have a stable income, even for non-employed ones. Like you have workers who just do daily works. This segment of users are completely abandoned and ignored in so many cases, especially by the banks. Even though they're doing good money, they're making good money, but they fail to prove their financial income. Such solutions, such accounts, if I may say, can really show a legitimate financial statement that can be used for microfinancing, and this is a tool for incentivizing and motivating people to opt in. Of course, there are many other ways to do that as well, but I think this is one good way to just start with incentivizing and motivating people to opt into the system.
Thank you for the answer. I remember a picture of a baby sitting on the floor, a magazine in front of him, and he's trying to use the paper like an iPad, trying to swipe it, trying to press the cover of the magazine. And that is what the world looks like to the next generations. Whatever we feel is self-evident is totally different to the newcomers. And the change that will take place is much bigger than we guess at the moment. And actually, my belief that when the cash will disappear is much sooner than what you were estimating. But it's still so long time ahead that it will not catch me because of this sentence, but I believe that it happens faster. But that is yet to be seen. Hey, one of the very interesting things, actually, Umair, you said that the value of the money, the piece of paper, it represents a value, but it doesn't have a value anymore. So does it also mean that the cryptocurrencies could easily take over the current currencies because they are digital stuff? And so that's the last question.
All these .com IPOs, and then majority of people got their fingers burnt. So only then, from the ashes, did a proper regulated system come into being. So we're almost expecting that car crash to happen before we then start to pile in. But in the interim, the speculators or the people who understand the risks, or in some cases, unfortunately, have the insider knowledge, are the ones who are going to win. And unfortunately, people like me, who are just a simple layperson, needs to watch from the sidelines before I can get my fingers burnt.
Thank you.
Well, I spent a lot of time trying to understand cryptocurrency and the mining process, just to get to the bottom of what is the real value of this cryptocurrency. Since I've been in this industry for a long time, it's essential for me to understand it. And I failed to understand what is the value of cryptocurrency. It's my opinion. It's just a personal opinion for me. And if I understand the value of that, I can easily introduce it to millions of users which we work with daily, if it has real value that we can prove to them. But we couldn't. And for me, I think the way forward is something that is known for us. As Omar said, that there has to be a barter deal between the user and the seller on a value that they can both agree on. And so far, it has been currencies. Before that, it was usual barter deal, but now it must be a virtual currency if we're going towards a cashless society. A virtual currency that represents an actual currency that has a real value. Cryptocurrency is still for us to discover. I don't really understand the value of it, even though I understand it's tied to some kind of energy. And if I fail to understand it, being in this industry for a very long time, I wonder how a normal user who just came in would understand it easily. That's my point of view.
Thank you. I'm honored that I got a chance to chair a panel with such brilliant minds. Let's give a big hand to the panel.
Thank you all the speakers for sharing wonderful presentation and thoughts. Now I would request Antti Koskinen to present the memento to the speakers.
Gentlemen, one at a time. Last but not least,
Thank you, Edmund.